The 9,637th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is maintenance of international peace and security, the role of women and youth people. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with the Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Belgium, Brazil, Denmark, and Finland to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting: Ms. Rosemary Dicaro, and the Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs; Ms. Sima Bahos, Executive Director of UN Women; Mr. Philippe Paulet, Assistant General Secretary for Youth Affairs; and Ms. Simone Bond Diouf, African Union Youth Ambassador for Peace for West Africa. It is so decided. In accordance with the Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite the following to participate in this meeting: His Excellency Mr. Stavros Lambrinidis, Head of the Delegation of the European Union of the United Nations; Her Excellency Ms. Ephigenia Kontoleutus, Permanent Observer for the International Organization of the Francophonie to the United Nations; and His Excellency Mr. Daniel Del Valle Blanco, Permanent Observer of the International Youth Organization to the United Nations. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council's members to document S/328/Rev1, a letter dated 22 April 2024 from the permanent representatives of Mozambique to the United Nations addressed to the Secretary General, transmitting a concept paper on the item under consideration. I now give the floor Mrs. Rosemary Dicaro. You have the floor, Excellency.
Madam President, thank you for hosting today's open debate. Excellencies, we know that women bear the brunt of the global rollback of human rights, and we know that violence against women in its cruelest forms is a feature of virtually all wars. I recently traveled to Afghanistan, where the plight of women is a crying example of the ground lost in human rights. Afghan women and girls are systematically denied their rights and dignity in many areas of life, including education. Women I met in Kabul told me of their aspirations and dreams: the same education afforded to men, equal employment opportunities, and freedom to choose their futures. They look to the global community to support them in realizing their rights so that they can contribute to their country's future. Of course, Afghanistan is not the only place where women face barriers to participating as equals in politics, peacemaking, public life, and employment. Commitments on gender equality are being ignored, if not reversed, in many regions. In a new agenda for peace, the Secretary General called for addressing the structural inequalities standing in the way of of the full realization of women's indivisible human rights. He called for dismantling patriarchal power structures. This means many things. It means equal access to representation, legal protections, physical autonomy, safety, economic opportunity, education, and health care. Ultimately, it comes down to a simple vision of overcoming obstacles that deny the full contribution of women. Armed conflict exacerbates structural obstacles to women's full equality. Institutional failure or collapse, impunity, and insecurity expose women to aggravated risks. More than half of the recorded incidents of political violence against women worldwide take place in conflict-affected countries. Doing away with structural gender inequalities is a matter of equity and right, but it is also a powerful means to improve the chances of success of peace and political processes. Our special political missions have strived to promote women's rights and their meaningful participation in these processes. In Yemen, for example, community mediation efforts undertaken by Yemeni women, often with the aim of releasing prisoners or achieving local ceasefires, have bolstered the UN's ongoing work to relaunch high-level, formal negotiations and put an end to almost 10 years of conflict. Madam President, the Women, Peace and Security agenda can only be successfully realized through national action. Over 100 countries from all regions have developed national action plans to implement Security Council Resolution 1325. This is commendable, but more countries must join this call. Member states can make a difference by committing to specific and targeted measures to advance women's leadership, including as mediators. In UN-led peace processes, we ensure that women are robustly represented. 30% of the Syria Constitutional Committee, for example, is female, and women make up 43% of our own mediation teams. In peace processes led by others and to which the UN provides some support, the percentage is often not so high. In such cases, we encourage increased representation of women. Madam President, young people deserve the opportunity to shape their future. They are not adults in the making. They are human beings with hopes, aspirations, ideas, and energy to contribute right now. The Secretary General's third report on youth, peace, and security puts forward recommendations to foster urgently needed progress on youth inclusion. It stresses that youth must be allowed to safely participate in peace processes and electoral activities. But the report also compels us not to ignore young people's growing mistrust in governance institutions and electoral processes. According to UNDP, 82% of young people across 65 countries state that electoral violence hinders their participation. One can understand why, but it is still a distressing statistic. And as stated in the Secretary General's report, the engagement of youth in peace processes continues to be minimal. This is a missed opportunity. By practically encouraging youth to engage in politics and peacemaking, governments can increase solidarity between different generations and rebuild trust in institutions. National action plans for youth, peace, and security are instrumental in institutionalizing the meaningful participation of youth and involving youth in decision-making about their futures. But they require dedicated resources and capacities. This year, in line with our Youth, Peace, and Security strategy, we are allocating resources from the Peacebuilding Fund to support the national action plans initiated by several countries. Regional efforts have the potential to catalyze national actions. The African Union was the first regional organization to establish a framework for youth, peace, and security and appoint youth ambassadors in addition to its youth envoy. The UN recently supported the Arab Regional Youth, Peace, and Security Strategy launched by the League of Arab States. With the help of artificial intelligence, young peace builders from 14 Arab countries were able to develop an action plan for their region. Our special political missions are also doing their part to enhance youth civic engagement. In Libya, for example, our mission engages with youth representatives to ensure they play a role in building consensus on the legal framework for national elections. Environmental peacebuilding is another area in which young people are demanding a role. Young women are often at the front lines of coping with scarce resources and defending the environment. This is linked to gendered social roles around caregiving and sourcing water and food. Young women's and men's roles as environmental defenders, community leaders, activists, mobilizers, and peace builders must be recognized and advanced. In conclusion, Madam President, there are no quick fixes to entrench power politics, patriarchal attitudes, or unequal social structures. Transformative changes rely on national action involving all segments of society. In many places, they also rely on international support. Through its meetings and decisions, the Council can reinforce that women, along with men, are responsible for building peace and prosperity in their societies, that without women leaders, peace cannot be sustained, that gender equality and realizing the aspirations of young people are essential for sustainable peace and security around the world. This Council could also help promote recognition of young people as important agents of change. I welcome the Council's efforts to more regularly invite women, civil society, and youth to brief the Council. Madam President, the Women, Peace and Security and Youth Peace and Security agendas offer us not just a vision, but a roadmap. We all need to do more to make the transformative vision of these agendas a reality. Thank you.
I thank Ms. DiCarlo for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Sima Bahous.
Thank you, Madam President, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of the Republic of Mozambique. Excellencies, my thanks to Mozambique for convening us around the crucial agenda of women, youth, peace and security. Excellencies, on November 1st last year, UN Women published a story about a 34-year-old psychotherapist in Rafah. She specialized in helping patients process the trauma of living in conflict. Her name was Amani. A few short weeks ago, on May 7th, Amani was killed along her 4 children. Amani is one of more than 10,000 women killed in the last 7 months. Just yesterday, scores of women and children were horrifically killed in Rafah, in a safe zone, while they were asleep in tents in a camp for the displaced. It is for Amani and for them, and for all women and girls caught in this conflict, that we demand a permanent ceasefire, unhindered humanitarian access, the release of all hostages, the determined pursuit of peace, and a 2-state solution. This war must stop because women and girls are bearing the brunt of it. Excellencies, last year, nearly 300 human rights defenders were killed, 49 of whom were women. These are just the known cases. They are likely many more. In January 2023, Mursal, a young woman and former member of parliament in Afghanistan, was shot and killed in her home near Kabul. She stayed behind when the Taliban took over, still clinging to hope that her contribution to the development of her country would be valued. In October last year, Halima, a 30-year-old journalist, was killed while covering the war in her native Sudan. Amani, Mursal, Halima, and the lives of women whose names we will never know were a demonstration of the power of women's contribution in crises, the way they carry their families and nations on their shoulders, and the way they wear the brunt of it all. The imperative of their knowledge of their communities, their voice, and leadership in decision key-making is also a testament. Their death is another painful reminder of the realities of war for women and girls, and that the disproportionate harm inflicting on women during wars and conflicts not of their making. To echo the Secretary General, to silence the guns, we must raise the voices of peace. Excellencies, while here we rightly embrace Security Council Resolution 1325 as a crucial global norm, for them it remains a distant dream, not only in Gaza, but in Haiti, in Myanmar, in Sudan, in the DRC, in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in too many countries to count the world over. I salute this Council's efforts on increasing the voices of women, including young women, as briefers, and I commend this and urge you to continue to do so, to listen, to engage, and to act on their asks. Excellencies, young women and girls face a double discrimination that is intensified during conflict: discrimination for their sex and for their age. I applaud the examples of progress made to address this in the Secretary General's report on youth, peace and security, which USG DiCarlo shared with us. Allow me to share a few more examples highlighting what can be done. As UN Women, we have conducted capacity building initiatives for youth organizations to participate in peace processes in Georgia and transitional justice initiatives in Lebanon. Last year, UN Women and UNFPA supported 79 peace-building processes that were inclusive of young women across 17 different countries. And since 2016, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, for which we serve as Secretariat, has supported organizations focused on youth or led by young women from 18 different countries. The funding window for women human rights defenders, set up in 2022, has already supported young women from 21 conflict-affected countries. And in Afghanistan, UN Women, IOM, and UNAMA have been conducting quarterly surveys to hear from Afghan women, including special emphasis on young women. We also continue to help break down barriers to inclusion by finding ways to engage women and young women. For example, we know that intergenerational dialogues in conflict-affected countries can have a powerful impact in communities searching for a way out of violence and division. We must create more such spaces and ensure representation of women and young women across decision-making bodies. These examples, Excellencies, show us what can be done and that there are solutions we can take to scale. The reality is that we are not doing so. This is despite the clear experience that engaging young women in development, in ensuring that they have equal opportunities, including equal access to the job market, helps sow social cohesion and stability and grows economies. What we must do is to ensure that we are breaking down power structures and harmful norms that hinder young women and girls their full meaningful participation, and that diminish their voice and their crucial contribution as leaders in their own right. And crucially, we must protect women and girls' education, their autonomy, and their freedom to decide on all their choices in life. Excellencies, in Afghanistan, it has been 3 years since the ban on the right to education has left 1.1 million Afghan girls out of school. In West and Central Africa, more than 13,000 schools have closed in recent years because of conflict and insecurity affecting millions of girls. In Gaza, girls and boys have been out of school since October 7th. In Haiti, hundreds of schools have been closed, teachers have been attacked, and thousands of children are out of school. In Sudan, 19 million school-aged children are out of the classroom. And in Ukraine, around 40% of children cannot access continuous education due to a lack of facilities. Excellencies, there is no second chance at childhood. How can our ambitions to rise to the responsibilities we have to afford young women and girls the best we can offer? How can it ever be realized when they have been denied their most basic of rights? I will conclude with 3 priority areas that require our collective attention, efforts, and commitment. First, we must bring young women to the heart of actual decision-making. When we speak of women's meaningful participation, including young women, lip service is to be condemned. Real commitment is quotas, temporary special measures, or other concrete, genuine efforts to not only talk about it, but to do it. Second, we must combat division, hate, and disinformation. Our battleground is increasingly online, and we are losing. I have no doubt that we can ultimately not only win, but that we will win. But for us to win, it will be key as we find our approaches to the challenges of social media, artificial intelligence, and even to new technologies not yet imagined, that the role of young women in their youth, understanding, and regulation will be crucial. No technology is inherently good or bad until we humans decide how it is to be employed, how its benefits and harms are to be leveraged. Third, young women must be far better represented at the peace table and in parliaments. Globally, less than 1% of parliamentarians are young women. Even where opportunities for civic engagement have been closed, you will find them in the streets, joining and leading social movements and protests. Their voices are powerful. Excellencies, we have seen young women fight and sacrifice for peace, democracy, and gender equality in many conflict-affected countries, from Gaza to Sudan to Haiti to Myanmar to Afghanistan and many more. They are heroes. They are unrelenting, and they will persist and endure. Of that, we should be in no doubt. The question for us is whether we will stand by their side or instead, as too often, we will lack that courage. Most of all, we must listen and commit, not to awaiting a future fit for them, but rather to hastening this future in everything we do. For the distinguished UN Security Council, it must begin with every peace-building process supported by the UN in any capacity. This year brings unique opportunities to place young women at the core of gender equality action. That includes the Summit of the Future. Next year, the Beijing Platform for Action marks 30 years, and UN Security Council Resolution 1325 marks 25 years. It will also be 10 years since the adoption of UN Security Council 2250, which recognized for the first time the important role and leadership of young people in building and sustaining peace. If you recall, the adoption then was chaired by the Crown Prince of Jordan, the youngest person ever to chair the Security Council. We must seize these opportunities, rise beyond the challenges which hold us back in the United Nations and elsewhere, recommit and push forward boldly. Young women are the leaders of tomorrow and the change makers of today. We must engage with them as such, with the commitment and urgency they deserve. And in this complex landscape of conflicts, crises, and challenges, we must recognize their aspirations everywhere as universal. They have a right to a world free from violence and fear, a world where their dreams can flourish, where they can ascend to their full potential, and protecting and promoting their rights is our duty. So let us hold dear the vision of a future where every girl becomes all she can be, where her hopes for a peaceful and vibrant future are our North Star, where we finally act upon our shared responsibility with determination and sincerity. And in that way, let us build together the world that our children and their children deserve, the world they imagine and that we need for all young people everywhere, always. I thank you.
I thank Ms. Bahoz for her briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Philippe Porre. Excellency, you have the floor.
Gracias.
Thank you, Madam President. Today, our world finds itself at a critical juncture where we are seeing the highest number of conflict since the Second World War, which is impacting youth around the world. From Gaza to Ukraine to Sudan, the death toll since 2022 has reached its highest level in 28 years. 1 out of every 4 young people around the world live in countries affected by conflict, with direct conflict impacting their lives and their means of subsistence. At the same time, youth distrust of institutions is worsening, exacerbating inequality and instability. In my recent official visits to countries such as Benin, Ethiopia, and the Philippines, I have seen this reality underscored. The message of young people is loud and clear. The multilateral system needs to intensify its efforts and put in place specific mechanisms to involve young people significantly and in a safe way in those spaces where policies are shaped and decisions are taken. The Youth, Peace, and Security Agenda is shaped by 3 key resolutions adopted by this Council, providing a vehicle for catalyst for transformation. It's clear how this agenda has already shifted the narrative around young people, distancing them from the image of being violent or easily radicalized in order to empower them as positive agents of change and promoters of peace. Madam President, although progress has been achieved, there's much that remains to be done. To comprehensively assess the progress achieved in the Youth, Peace, and Security Agenda and its 5 key pillars, it's a pleasure for me to report to the Council for the 3rd report of the Secretary General on Youth, Peace, and Security. A report crafted by the UNFPA, DPPA, and the Youth Office of the UN were the main authors of this report.
They continue to create their own movements, demonstrating their growing agency and leadership across the globe. They are rekindling hope in Syria, mobilizing for peace in Sudan, and supporting community engagement in refugee camps in Chad. In Somalia, young people's participation in district council elections also increased after UNFPA and FBA hosted intergenerational political forums. But despite growing political momentum for the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda, this commitment has not resulted in greater investment to sustain youth-led peace building and meaningful youth participation. To fully support their engagement in decision-making processes, additional resources and age disaggregated data are essential. Advancements have been made in the institutionalization of young people's meaningful engagement here at the United Nations, notably by the establishment of the United Nations Youth Office, which I have the responsibility to lead. However, more needs to be done to translate policies into tangible action, ensuring that no one and no young person is left behind. As violence of exclusion persists, alongside discriminatory laws and a rapidly shrinking civic space, young people are facing a range of threats. Fueled by social media, digital threats are on the rise. These threats have increased the spread of hate speech, the spread of misinformation, and sexual harassment. Young women and girls, especially those with disabilities and from marginalized communities, are at a heightened risk of violence. Initial steps have been taken by the United Nations and civil society organizations to address these protection concerns through country-specific measures. For example, United Nations peacekeeping operations have focused on establishing community alert networks with youth leaders in countries such as the Central African Republic. These efforts enhance early warning capacities and community-based protection mechanisms. Distinguished members of the Security Council, although progress has been made to institutionalize the YPS agenda, the momentum on youth, peace and security within the Security Council slowed in 2022 and 2023. According to the Secretary General, the references to young people in UN Security Council resolutions decreased during this time, with only 34% of Council resolutions mentioning young people. While I am pleased to see that Simone has been invited to this debate, it is concerning to see a decline in the number of young people briefing both the Security Council and the Peacebuilding Commission between 2022 to 2023 compared to prior years. Moreover, only 6 out of 11 peacekeeping operations and only 13 out of 24 special political missions have references related to youth, peace and security, or related to youth engagement in their mandates. Advancing the integration of YPS elements into peacekeeping operations requires dedicating funding, capacities, and strategic partnerships. Excellencies, as we approach the 10-year anniversary of the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda and the Resolution 2250, allow me to highlight 3 key recommendations outlined in the Secretary General's report. These recommendations, also supported by young peace builders in my consultation with the Global Coalition Civil Society Working Group, are vital for advancing our agenda. Firstly, it is crucial to hold an annual Security Council open debate on youth, peace and security to ensure sustained engagement and momentum for the YPS agenda. This includes restoring trust among youth, governments and the United Nations, with accountability being key. Secondly, we must increase opportunities for young people to participate in the Security Council deliberations and country visits. In practice, this means reviewing the Council's working methods to strengthen youth engagement and ensure protection protocols for the safe and meaningful participation of young briefers, recognizing the unique risks they face. Thirdly, the Security Council must continue strengthening concrete youth, peace and security elements as part of mandate renewals of peacekeeping operations and special political missions. As the negotiations for the Pacts of the Future continue to unfold, I would like to urge the Council membership to ensure inclusion of strong and specific commitments and actions on youth, peace and security in Chapter 2 of the Pact. This will solidify the commitment to youth-inclusive peace building and ensure the agenda's sustainability and impact.
In conclusion, bringing about a future defined by human rights, justice, sustainability, and peace depends, amongst other things, on the implementation of these recommendations. It is only through multipartite and collaborative partnerships, including all parties, can we build the future that we want. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Señora Presidenta.
I thank Mr. Paule for his briefing. Now, I give the floor to Ms. Simone Bonde Diouf. Excellency, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of the Republic of Mozambique. Madam United Nations Under-Secretary General for Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Madam Executive Director of UN Women, Mr. Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs, Excellencies, distinguished guests. First, allow me to convey my gratitude to the Republic of Mozambique for not only placing this important issue on the Security Council's agenda, but also for extending an invitation to us to showcase the leadership of young women peacebuilders who are actively involved in sustainable peace initiatives and who are thereby demonstrating the transformative impact of their collaboration. As the African Youth Ambassador for Peace representing the West African region, I am living proof that international and regional institutions can choose to trust the expertise and leadership of young women by putting them on the global stage. In this regard, I would like to particularly convey my gratitude to the African Union for its unwavering commitment to mainstream and upscale the meaningful participation of young people in all aspects of peace and security under Article 17 of the African Youth Charter. Excellencies, to highlight the incredible work that the women peace builders are engaged in on a daily basis on the African continent, allow me to share the inspiring story of 4 young Congolese women with whom I have had the privilege to collaborate with in the DRC. These women have been instrumental in implementing and adapting the youth peace and security resolutions in their countries, embodying the resilience and innovation characteristic of young women in this space. First, we have Nora and Marie-Rose. These 2 young women led the National Technical Secretariat on Resolution 2250, created by the government of the DRC to promote implementation and institutionalization of UNSC Resolution 2250. Following their leadership and coordination, the DRC created its first National Action Plan on Youth, Peace and Security in August 2022. Next, we have Emily and Esther, the coordinators of the Young Women Leaders for Peace networks in North and South Kivu. Despite a challenging security context marked by war, they brought the YSP agenda to their communities by leading the localization process. From data collection to drafting strategic documents to advocacy at the level of the province, Emily and Esther have ensured that the NAP considered the gender-specific needs of young people. The backgrounds and leadership of these 4 young women are highlighted in a thematic paper prepared by them and published by the Global Network of Women Peace Builders and UN Women on the occasion of the Secretary General's 3rd report on the YPS agenda. That paper emphasizes the leadership of young Congolese women in implementing the YPS and Women Peace and Security agendas in synergy, drawing on lessons learned from their contributions to peace in the peace process in the DRC. Madam President, Nora, Marie-Rose, Emily, and Esther are not alone. Many young women across Africa are dedicated to addressing the challenges that affect their future, such as climate change, resurgence of conflict, violent extremism, political marginalization, conflict-related sexual violence, and a lack of economic opportunity. These young women are key to upholding peace and human security in their countries. The YPS agenda explicitly recognizes the role of young women as equal partners in peace processes, mainly through Resolution 2535. This resolution acknowledges the unique and intersectional needs of different groups of young people, especially young women, in conflict, peace building, and humanitarian responses, and calls on member states and other peace actors to promote synergies between the IPS and WPS programs. This resolution also promotes accountability to the YPS agenda by encouraging the provision of adequate resources to support peace efforts led by diverse young women. The African Union's Continental Framework on YPS encourages sensitivity to gender dynamics by avoiding stereotypical assumptions about the roles of young men and women. It calls on member states to recognize the gendered impacts of violence and develop strategies to address the needs of young women. It's essential to highlight some programs and success stories that should serve as references and best practices to continue action in favor of these young women. We have the AU Youth Ambassadors for Peace program, which appoints young women, people to work with. We have the FamWise initiative, which aims to strengthen the role of women and young women in conflict prevention and mediation. The Youth Caucuses of African Women Leaders Network, established by the African Union to promote female leadership in all areas, including peace and security. And finally, the Young Women's Mentoring Initiative of the Permanent Mission of the African Union, which I was able to participate in the pilot program. This was created to bridge the gender and generation gap that hinders young African women's leadership in multilateral organizations. So here are some laudable initiatives, and they should be supported. Madam President, Excellencies, allow me to also mention the story of Christine from Kenya, who is currently conducting the local YPS consultations in all counties as part of the development of the Kenya YPS program, and Nanette, the national coordinator of the Chad YPS coalition. These young women work on a daily basis to embody the intersection of these two agendas. And they are two distinct yet complementary frameworks that are the foundation for developing comprehensive and inclusive peace and security policies. Both frameworks acknowledge that conflict, war, and violence impact young women and people differently, and that their contributions to peace, conflict prevention, and humanitarian responses are often overlooked. The commitment of young women across the African continent is undeniable, but political leaders must also play their part. Young women need to be economically and socially empowered to have the resources, capabilities, and confidence to be agents of change. In my experience working with young people, especially young women, for several years, I have learned one thing. When you invest in young women, they give back to the community, starting a virtuous rather than a vicious cycle. Economic empowerment is necessary but not enough. It is also essential to recognize the potential of young women as political actors, as seen in the example of Sibila Ouedraogo, the youngest candidate in Burkina Faso's recent legislative elections. Dear members of the UN Security Council and representative member states, recognizing the importance of empowering women requires more than just words. It involves gaining their trust and allowing them to participate in public fora and reinstating their confidence in multilateralism. The YPS and WPS agendas serve as frameworks to illustrate how young women's involvement can effectively be enhanced. However, little progress can be achieved without genuine political determination. During the Summit for the Future in September, all member states will have the chance to showcase their dedication to young people by incorporating robust commitments and concrete actions supporting the YPS agenda in the Pact for the Future. This is particularly urgent since in the latest version of the Pact, all the YPS and WPS language has been removed. I urge member states to reverse this change and correct it. The YPS agenda must continue to be a priority for the Security Council under the guidance of the UN Youth Office, UNFPA, and the Departments of Peacebuilding Affairs, whose leadership and coordination I would like to commend here, especially with regard to inclusion and protection issues. This leads me to my final point, protecting young women peacebuilders. Even if some young women bravely speak out despite threats, fears silences many others. Combating hate speech and gender-based violence facilitated by technology is essential in order to create safe, civic offline and online spaces. If I may, I'd like to conclude now with the following call for action. I urge all UN member states, duty bearers, and stakeholders to consider the following. First, implement, fund, and institutionalize the YPS and WPS agendas as requested by 400 young people in the Cotonou Youth Action Agenda. This should include specific frameworks at local, regional, and national levels, ensure that the specific needs of young women are considered when developing WPS and AP, include promotion of YPS and WPS agendas in the Pact for the Future, highlight best practices and lessons learned from young women peacebuilders, and finally, encourage collaboration and dialogue between young women and other stakeholders to bridge generational and gender gaps. Thank you for your kind attention.
I thank Ms. Dlhovo for her briefing. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation of Mozambique. Sua Excelência,
Her Excellency Rosemary DiCarlo, Under Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, Ms. Sima Bahous, Executive Director of UN Women, Mr. Felipe Paulier, Assistant Secretary General for Youth Affairs, Ms. Simone Bode Diouf, African Union Youth Ambassador for Peace for West Africa, Excellencies, permanent representatives of Security Council member states, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the government of the Republic of Mozambique, I am pleased to welcome all members of the United Nations Security Council and all participants in this ministerial debate on the role of women and youth in maintaining the peace and security which constitutes an opportunity for member states to analyze the contribution and achievements of women and youth in decision-making processes on matters of peace and security in Africa and the world at large. We are grateful to all the briefers who have contributed with their valuable knowledge and perspectives on the topic under discussion. The exchange of ideas information is fundamental to deepen our knowledge and mutual understanding. Our appreciation goes to the members of the Peace Building Commission for the written advice which was addressed by consensus to the Security Council on the topic under discussion. And we hope that members of the Security Council will take a good note of the points raised by the Peace Building Commission. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this debate constitutes an important opportunity for us to identify best practices, gaps, challenges, and the way forward to improve the participation of women and young people in efforts to prevent and resolve conflicts and promote regional and international peace and security. Excellencies, the choice of the theme for this event is a worthy recognition of the importance of women and young people as a positive force in preventing and resolving conflicts and building sustainable peace, which has gained momentum since the adoption of the following legal instruments. One is the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and Girls, and Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, as well as Security Council Resolutions 2250 and 2419 on youth, peace, and security. The Republic of Mozambique understands that the impact and efficiency of peace and security policies and strategies can only be achieved through a deep understanding of the experiences of violence, injustice, and exclusion, both in situations of violent conflict and in contexts of inequality, insecurity, as well as inequality and uncertainty in conflict contexts experienced by women and young people. The knowledge and experiences that women and young people bring to the table, as well as their potential contributions to solving complex problems facing the African security sectors, should guide discussions on how to adopt a new approach which is inclusive for women and youth on issues aimed at preserving, achieving, and consolidating peace and security. In this context, the government of the Republic of Mozambique has been making efforts to ensure the promotion of gender equality, as well as placing women and young people at the center of the decision-making processes, as illustrated, among others, by the gender parity in the government of Mozambique, and the progressive increase in the number of women and young people in legislative and judicial bodies, which allows for their increasingly active participation in the country's political, economic, social, and cultural spheres. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in this context, the Republic of Mozambique has approved normative instruments to promote gender equality and women's empowerment, with emphasis on the gender policy and the strategy for its implementation, as part of promoting women's participation in peace processes and conflict resolution. Mozambique has approved the first national plan on women, peace, and security for the period 2018-2022. This multi-sectoral instrument highlights the importance of considering the specific needs of women and girls in the context of armed conflicts and post-conflict situations in the political and legal spheres, in the gender equality and equity in defense and security institutions, and in women's participation in peace and security structure and processes, in preventing gender-based violence in conflict and peace situations, and gender perspective in emergency relief and recovery efforts. Regarding the implementation of the national Plan on Women, Peace and Security, allow me to highlight the following results achieved. The training of 728 government and civil society employees, with 313 being men and 415 women, in order to enable assistance to survivors and victims of gender-based violence. The establishment of 17 reference centers for women and girls at risk of victims of violence, raising awareness, community awareness about gender equality in order to ensure the effective participation of women and girls in peace and security processes in Mozambique. We have the social economic integration of 17,471 women and girls affected by conflicts and cyclones in the provinces of Cabo Delgado in northern Mozambique, and Manica and Sofala in the central region. The training of more than 300 representatives of grassroots organizations. We're talking about the training of more than 300 representatives and civil society on the Women, Peace and Security agenda in order to defend and promote peace and security processes in Mozambique. The training of 3,000 members of the police and the armed forces of Mozambique in matters pertaining to the promotion of gender equality and Resolution 1325. In Mozambique, the assessment of the first National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security is underway with a view to providing guidelines for the second edition of the National Plan on Women, Peace and Security. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the inclusion of young people in the peace and security agenda and in society more broadly is fundamental to build sustainable peace and security in our countries. And young people are the present and future of our nations. Therefore, in national agendas and policies, member states must define the active participation of young people in the construction of peace and security as one of their priorities. As we are aware, young people are the main driving force in the face of conflicts around the world, considering that they're on the front line in the fight against terrorism, extremism, and other forms of violence against communities and states. And in this regard, there is a need to involve them in the search for a solution. The promoters of war and terrorism, often with hidden agendas, as is the case in Mozambique, have manipulated young people to adhere to their destabilization agendas, taking advantage of their social, economic, and educational vulnerabilities. In recognition of the nexus between peace and development, the government of Mozambique has adopted a holistic approach in the fight against terrorism and violent extremism, which includes actions of an economic and social nature with emphasis on the training of young people to integrate the job market and provide a living for themselves and their families, as well as the transformation of young people into a vehicle for promoting development. In this context, allow me, Excellencies, to highlight some initiatives carried out by the government of Mozambique, such as the programs called My Kit, My Job, a program called Acredita Emprego, and also another one called SIACA, which is an initiative on the empowerment of girls. We would like to thank the bilateral and multilateral cooperation partners in implementing these initiatives that have facilitated the participation of young people in promoting employment and development in Mozambique. It is important to highlight the creation of the National Youth Council, which is a national multi-party forum for young people to interact with each other in a vehicle for presenting their concerns, aspirations, and proposals for solutions, including in the field of peace and security. We equally highlight the actions of young men and women who are national artists and have led independent initiatives to promote peace and security through crafts such as music, theater, singing and dancing, sculpture works, among other initiatives that draw society's attentions to the importance of peace and which have received the support and encouragement of the government of Mozambique. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I conclude my intervention by reinforcing the call to the need to raise awareness among political leaders in member states to prioritize the agenda on women and youth in their different interventions on peace and security, and the importance of greater involvement of civil society organizations, women's groups, youth, traditional and religious leaders, and the use of social and community media, including community radio, to facilitate the understanding and participation of civil society at grassroots levels in the process of drafting and implementing national action plans on women and youth in the context of peace and security and the political, economic, and social life of our countries. In our opinion, member states must prioritize the allocation of resources from national budgets and from partners, including through the application of budgeting from a gender perspective, and increase the participation and capabilities of all stakeholders in efforts to implement the women and youth agendas in matters pertaining to peace and security. The regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, and UN Women must continue with the political advocacy of this agenda at the level of member states, and to this end, promote national and regional consultations to assess the progress achieved. The need to prioritize data collection and the establishment of clear performance indicators to measure the progress in collaboration with regional economic communities, the African Union Commission, and other stakeholders. Experience has shown that efforts must be intensified to ensure that post-conflict reconstruction and development issues are addressed in a holistic manner, including those related to the abuse, trauma, and other psychosocial needs of victims of violent conflicts. There is a strong imperative to invest in the necessary resources to deal with the indirect effects of conflicts. In the same perspective, there is a need to realign the ongoing stabilization efforts of the African Union with the post-conflict reconstruction and development policy to ensure holistic and appropriate approaches to the objectives of the interventions of our states. These efforts must be guided by the appropriate policies in order to avoid overlaps in our strategic interventions. Finally, allow me, Excellencies, to reiterate our deepest gratitude for your presence in this high-level debate under Mozambique's second presidency of the United Nations Security Council. We are hopeful that together, everyone doing their part, we will be able to attain peace, a peace which we all need in order to build the world we all need, and a better world for all. Excellencies, I thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much.
I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, thank you for convening this debate. We also thank the briefers, USG Rosemary DiCarlo, ASG Philippe Ollier, Director Sima Bahous, and AU Youth Ambassador Simon Bode Diouf for their insightful presentations. The prosperity of a nation cannot be divorced from the prosperity of its women and youth populations. Sierra Leone reiterates its firm commitment to enhancing and advancing the role of women and youth in peace-building processes at national, regional, and international levels. We believe that when women and youth lead and participate in peace-building processes, there is sustainable peace and socio-economic development is more meaningful. With so many conflicts raging around the world, correlating to an increase in flagrant violations of the human rights of women, youth, and children, Sierra Leone family believes that upholding the human rights of every individual helps to prevent conflict and contribute to a sustainable peace. We know the expansion and improvement over the years of the global normative frameworks for sustainable, comprehensive, and inclusive peace to explicitly promote the valuable contributions of women and youth. The Women, Peace and Security Agenda set forth in United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 and 7 subsequent WPS resolutions. The Youth, Peace and Security Agenda set forth in UNSCR 2250 and the evolving concept of sustaining peace outlined in parallel resolutions of the Security Council Resolutions 2282 and General Assembly JR 70/262, all call for inclusive planning, program design, policy development, and decision-making processes for conflict prevention, resolution, and recovery. Resolution 2250 urges member states to increase inclusive representation of youth in decision-making at all levels in local, national, regional, and international institutions and mechanisms for the prevention and resolution of conflicts. The WPS agenda has also long championed a pathway for designing and implementing policies that ensure direct participation of women in political, economic, and social decision-making. In recognition of the critical constituencies of women and youth on the continent and across the globe, the African Union Strategy on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, as well as the African Union's Continental Framework for Youth, Peace and Security, and related subsequent declarations and communiques, both similarly seek to strengthen women's and youth agents in Africa, and respectively call for the participation of women and youth in nation building and peace building through targeted programming, capacity building, and mainstreaming. Furthermore, the African Union has since established FemWise, which is a network of African women in conflict prevention and mediation, which provides a platform for strategic advocacy, capacity building, and networking, aimed at enhancing implementation of the commitment for women's inclusion in peacemaking in Africa. Madam President, it is unfortunate that women generally continue to face significant structural barriers to active participation in peace and political processes, as well as in expanding their socio-economic power. Recent reports by the Secretary General note that representation of women in negotiating UN-led peace processes and implementation of peace agreements across several countries generally remain at low levels. There has also been a marked increase in the number of women and girls at risk of gender-based violence in conflict situations, including about 3,522 UN-verified cases of CRSV targeting women and girls for the 2022-2023 period. Youth also continue to face significant physical, psychological, sociocultural, financial, legal, and digital threats, which are further exacerbated in conflict situations. Youth employment is still 3.5 times that for adults, with about 298 million young men and women not engaged in employment, education, or training. Over 600 million African youth live in conflict-affected regions, with their experiences strongly determined by gender and generational power dynamics. Faced with staggering youth unemployment and widespread dissatisfaction with entrenched governance structures, young Africans are demonstrating a restlessness that is being manifested in increasing tensions with political actors. Additionally, this has led to brain drain in the continent, with many youths, especially in West Africa and the Sahel, opting to take the dangerous journey through the Sahara Desert and the Mediterranean Sea to seek greener pastures in Europe. Sierra Leone recognizes the establishment of an inclusive and participatory national peace infrastructure as part of an essential condition for the realization of the right to peace. In 2021, the Independent Commission for Peace and National Cohesion for Sierra Leone was established to promote peace, reconciliation, and unity in Sierra Leone, build peace cultures, enhance tolerance, and support peaceful resolution of conflicts. Since its establishment, the Commission has supported national reconciliation efforts, especially after the 2024 presidential elections. Drawing from our approach in ensuring the involvement of women and youth in governance, Sierra Leone has taken deliberate measures in legal and institutional law, reforming beyond removing barriers that impede their involvement to inclusive, safe, and active participation. The passage of the Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment Act 2022 and Public Elections Act 2022 ensured minimum 30% representation of women in political and public decision-making bodies. Currently, women comprise 30% elected ordinary members of parliament, 34.5% of ministers, and 33% deputy ministers, 41% of elected mayors and chairpersons, 34% elected councillors or local councils. Representation in the security sector has also increased to 23% for the police and 13% for the armed forces. As a marked demonstration of commitment to inclusive and safe participation of women and youth in peace building and development, the 14-member tripartite platform set up for government and opposition to engage on critical national electoral reforms for enhancing democracy, national cohesion and peace includes 4 women and 4 youth representatives. Sierra Leone continues to deepen partnerships with local, regional and international actors for advancing the legal, administrative and operational systems for the BPS and YPS resolutions and gender-responsive humanitarian actions. The Ministry of Gender and Children's Affairs, in collaboration with civil society groups such as the Global Network of Women Peace Builders and Campaign for Good Governance, has also integrated partnerships with youth peace builders in conflict resolution, peace building, and conflict prevention initiatives. In 2009, Sierra Leone became the 4th country in West Africa and 7th in Africa to develop a national action plan for the full implementation of Resolution 10825. We have recently completed implementation of the 2nd Generation National Action Plan and in the process of finalizing the development of the 3rd Generation National Action Plan in collaboration with women civil society groups, youth organizations, and stakeholders. The government has also prioritized investing in the capacity, agency, and leadership of young political leaders to strengthen their ability to collaboratively lead peace efforts and use the skills to tackle other concerns that affect their lives, particularly in these challenging times. Both the Youth in Politics and Peace Building and the Youth at Risk projects aim to enhance social cohesion and dialogue for able-bodied and physically and mentally challenged youths. This is to enhance their involvement in civic engagement at national and community levels through training, change communication, advocacy, and awareness raising, as well as increasing access to skills training, prevention and protection services related to gender-based violence and other harmful practices. Madam President, Sierra Leone calls on member states and the international community to respond in a more determined and comprehensive manner to harness the untapped potential of young people and women, including through improvements in education and training, especially in practical, technical, vocational, and digital skills, including their economic participation through flexible financing schemes and entrepreneurship initiatives, and participation in policy formulation and decision-making through intentional appointments to leadership positions and extensive consultations on relevant issues. We call for the full implementation of all Security Council resolutions on women, peace and security, and youth peace and security. In conclusion, the world today is home to 1.8 billion young people, the largest generation in history, and to 4.04 billion females. The voices and actions of women and youths as peace builders, decision makers, human rights defenders, and agents of change are fundamental to the durability of peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana. Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam President, Guyana thanks Mozambique for convening today's open debate on this important subject. We also thank USG DiCarlo, Executive Director Bahous, ASG Polier, and Youth Peace Ambassador Ms. Diouf for sharing their perspectives and indeed for all their efforts. As we meet today, we acknowledge that women are among those facing the brunt of the impacts of conflict. To highlight just one example, in Gaza, they continue to be killed with impunity, and those who have survived are left to care for their surviving children and relatives, sometimes injured, in the most inhumane conditions. At the same time, we see young people the world over being at the full forefront of jolting the world's conscience to stop war. In many other places, they are taking action to protect democracy. This meeting is therefore timely. Madam President, while women, peace and security, and youth, peace and security are seen as distinct agendas and are often addressed in silos, they are important overlaps which should be recognized. Indeed, I venture to say that the ultimate goal of peace and security will not be achieved without understanding and capitalizing on these synergies. As we consider the role of young people, we see that most peace and security interventions targeting youth prioritize young men, with minimal or no attention given to young women. Young women are instead categorized within the broader WPS agenda, where there is often a misconception that women are a homogeneous group. We are also aware that much more needs to be done to ensure that women are integrally involved in decision-making in peace processes. In this context, I offer some reflections. First, gender stereotypes in the wider world context are amplified in situations of armed conflict. Young men are regarded as prone to turning to violence and vulnerable to recruitment by armed groups and extremists, while young women are often portrayed as passive victims in need of protection with little acknowledgement that they too are being recruited and can be recruited, or that they can contribute to conflict resolution and peace processes. While the adoption of Security Council 2250, Resolution 2250, was an important shift in the perspective on the role of young people, from victim or perpetrator of violence to positive agents of change and capable of contributing to conflict prevention and resolution, we must ensure that no category of youth is left out. Young women must be part of this positive vision. This leads me to my second point, which is the importance of meaningful inclusion of women and young people. Targeted action should be taken to ensure the full participation of women, young people, including young women, in all aspects of preventing and recovering from conflict and building peace. Their participation should not be limited to civil society, but should be mainstreamed into government and political structures. This Council has seen many powerful examples of young women who are leading efforts within their communities to achieve sustainable peace. They have risked reprisals and come to share their assessments of the situations in their countries and communities. Indeed, the Security Council can lead by example by increasing opportunities for young persons from different regions to brief the Council, as suggested by our USG on youth. Thirdly, critical to the Council's prevention agenda must be addressing root causes and risk factors of conflict. Poverty, unemployment, internal displacement, lack of economic opportunities, and desperation have driven millions of young people and children into the arms of extremist groups. These conditions are often exacerbated for women and girls who are also plagued by sexual and gender-based violence, trafficking, and forced marriages. As we address root causes, I wish to underscore the centrality of quality education, which, among other things, will build their capacity to be part of solutions. This is, however, a challenge when access to education is disrupted on account of conflict and attacks on schools. Increasing failure by parties to conflicts to adhere to the international humanitarian law protections for schools and other critical civilian infrastructure is risking a generation of young people in conflict-affected areas being left behind. Fourthly, in this digital age, attention must be paid to social media spaces and how these impact young people. Youth-dominated social media spaces are driving both positive and negative outcomes. Young people are facing new and increased challenges related to online hate speech, misinformation, racism, violence, bullying, unwanted sexual advances, as well as being recruited by extremist groups. It is essential that there is education on responsible online behavior, as well as robust frameworks to monitor misuse of digital spaces and pursue accountability by perpetrators. Madam President, finally, the Council must continue integrating and strengthening the YPS and WPS agendas into mandate renewals of peacekeeping operations and special political missions. Women and young people must be at negotiating tables and integrally involved in implementing peace agreements. Adequate resourcing for their empowerment and participation should be built into mandates with strong monitoring mechanisms to measure implementation and efficiency. In conclusion, Madam President, it must be emphasized that the meaningful participation of women and youth in peace processes, including at decision-making levels, can build trust and break cycles of violence, yielding sustainable outcomes. This Council must continue to promote their meaningful participation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Madam President, we'd like to thank Mozambique for convening today's debate. We thank the Undersecretary General of our Political and Peacebuilding Affairs, Ms. Rosemary DiCarlo, the Executive Director of UN Women, Ms. Sima Bahous, the Assistant Secretary General for Youth, Mr. Philippe Paulier, and the African Union Youth Ambassador, Ms. Diouf, for their statements and their contributions to our discussion. Madam President, we live in an increasingly complex geopolitical environment, a growing number of conflicts, and the constant emergence of new threats and challenges, which reaffirm the need to bring together all sectors of society in order to achieve lasting, sustainable peace and security. Women are an integral part of conflict resolution and building sustainable peace. They contribute to more harmonious and durable solutions in reconciliation mediation processes. Young people, in turn, with their innovative ideas, energy, and desire for change, can complement these efforts and help in finding more effective solutions. At the same time, we must not forget that women and youth are also the first victims of conflict and instability who are in need of protection. A vivid example of this is the situation in the Gaza sector, where the number of casualties among women and children is in the tens of thousands, and where women and children are forced to live without a roof over their heads, often without food and water as well. We repeatedly hear statements about the importance of developing regional and national strategies and plans, or establishing national institutions to implement Resolutions 1325 and 2250, which placed the topics of women, peace and security and youth peace and security on the Security Council's agenda. A question arises in this regard. What strategies and entities for women and youth are involved in resolving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict? What role do such strategies play in specific conflict situations? Clarity is needed on this issue, in our view. Is the UN simply multiplying bureaucratic structures in this area and formally preparing and updating plans of actions that do not play a proper role in preventing and resolving conflicts? Madam President, the Russian Federation is pleased to note a steady increase in women's and young people's participation in peace processes, including the negotiation and peacekeeping aspects, as well as their contribution to addressing security issues. Russia is also making its contribution to training UN police and peacekeepers from more than 50 countries around the world, primarily African states, and these include a large percentage of women. Such involvement allows to create more sustainable and trusting relations with local populations and facilitates subsequent measures to rehabilitate and reintegrate victims of violence and other violations. However, such involvement must be a natural part of societal evolution and a conscious choice rather than a formal priority imposed from the outside. The Russian Federation shares the view that Russian and young people are making and can make an even greater contribution to preventing and resolving conflicts. However, such attributes as age and gender cannot be the determining criteria, much less the only criteria for involving certain individuals in decision-making processes, especially on such sensitive issues as the maintenance of peace and security. What matters here are the real needs in a specific situation as well as professional skills. We cannot ignore the trend whereby the participation of women and youth becomes an ideological issue for wealthy donor countries who make the participation of these groups a strict condition for allocating assistance to poor countries and conflict-affected states. Such neo-colonial practices are unacceptable. No one has the right to tell sovereign governments how to build their states, prevent conflicts, or what percentage of women and young people should participate in political institutions. This is especially true when donor countries themselves often do not meet the criteria they impose on others. It is also important to keep in mind that the term youth also includes individuals under 18 years of age. In other words, those who are, according to the Convention on the Rights of the Child, children. Participation of children in political activity cannot be justified given their physical and mental immaturity. In this regard, we believe efforts are also necessary to counter the political instrumentalization of youth and attempts to present the interests of certain political groups as the vision of the young generation. Madam President, achieving the goals of the Women, Peace and Security and Youth, Peace and Security agendas is impossible without addressing the issues of women's and young people's development, namely overcoming poverty, ensuring access to education, particularly in countries affected by armed conflicts. Indeed, education plays a key role in shaping a generation that is prepared to work for the benefit of society and for peace. In this regard, Russia attaches the utmost priority to cooperation with developing countries in the area of education. Equally important is strengthening cooperation in the area of ensuring women's and young people's access to resources, to technologies, and the banking sector. We are convinced that these measures will contribute to states' sustainable post-conflict recovery. It is also particularly important to protect the institutions of family and motherhood and traditional family values as the moral foundation of any society and the key to successful development now and in the future. Madam President, we also cannot fail to note the negative impact of unilateral coercive measures on the involvement of women and youth in peace activities. These measures have a most harmful impact on the situation and well-being of these groups, making them more vulnerable. They deprive women and young people of prospects for the future, employment and education opportunities, social protection, and other benefits, which has an indisputable impact on the involvement of these groups in public life. To sum up, we wish to note that creating safe conditions for women's and young people's participation in peace processes is possible when general security is guaranteed for all participants of the process. Only through consolidating society as a whole is it possible to achieve genuine, sustainable, and durable peace that duly accounts for the interests of all stakeholders. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President, and welcome back to this chamber, Minister. We still believe in the promise of a better world for everyone. Do you? That is the question posed by young people in an open letter to world leaders, shared by the United Nations Youth Office a month ago. It has now been 25 years, 5 years after the momentum kickstarted by the 1995 Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, that the Council adopted Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. That resolution promised to open the doors of peace processes to women and to better protect them. Nearly 10 years ago, with Resolution 2250 on youth, peace, and security, the same was promised to young people. Today's debate gives us the opportunity to review the implementation of these promises. I thank Mozambique for convening us here. I would also like to thank the speakers for the expertise that they have shared with us, and I welcome the opinion of the Peace Building Commission. Madam President, in recent decades, we have broadened our vision of peace and recognized the diversity of the people who build it. We can be proud of these achievements, of the recognition of the essential role of women in peace and security, and of youth action in conflict resolution. But let us turn to the present. Where are we today, according to the latest reports from the Secretary General? For women, the doors to peace building are, at best, ajar and even seem to be closing. Women as mediators, negotiators, and signatories are still the exception rather than the norm in peace processes. We heard it today from United Nations representatives. If we look at the numbers in terms of protection, those are not encouraging at all. As for young people in peace processes, the picture is likewise mixed, as we've heard. While commendable initiatives exist, for example, in Colombia, Yemen, and the Central African Republic, young people generally suffer more violence, are rarely involved in peace negotiations, and often lose trust in public institutions. In addition, the approach of the double anniversary of Resolutions 1325 and 2250 reminds me of the double barrier that young women must overcome to participate in peace building. One promising way of overcoming these barriers is through networking. First, networking between women and young people committed to peace. Networks such as FemWise Africa demonstrate the success of this instrument in terms of visibility, mutual learning, and knowledge transfer, as well as protection. It is all about creating networks where they don't exist yet, linking women's and youth networks where they do exist, and actively extending them to more young women. Secondly, policymakers need to integrate and use these networks and establish genuine partnerships with them. National Women, Peace and Security and Youth Peace and Security action plans can contribute to this. Finally, networking at the multilateral level to implement the WPS and YPS agendas. In this regard, we welcome the essential role of the advice of the Peace Building Commission in the Security Council. Madam President, the experience of many peace processes shows that the more peace is rooted in each individual, the more solid it is and the more it can grow. It is the actions of society as a whole that sustain peace. Building this peace is too big a challenge to do without the expertise and experience of women and young people. As member states, we will again have the opportunity to keep the promises we made almost 25 years ago, with firm and strong messages in the Pact for the Future and in the 2025 review of the peace-building architecture. Switzerland will continue to call for respect for human rights and international humanitarian law. Without protection, women and young people cannot participate fully. Switzerland will also continue to work to ensure that the voice of women and young people is fully heard in this council and that we act with them. Following your example, Madam President, we will pay particular attention to this issue during our presidency of the Council in October, when we will hold the annual debate on women, peace, and security. We have heard closely, and we have listened closely, and we will incorporate all the recommendations made today with determination and sincerity so that youth can, with growing agency, continue to believe in this promise of a better world where, according to the words of Madame Diouf, they can be actors of change. I thank you.
Thank the representative of Switzerland. Now I give the floor the representative of United States. Excellency, you have the floor.
Madam President, I want to thank Mozambique for organizing this very important and timely debate. I also wish to thank the Secretariat for the latest report on youth, peace, and security, and I very much appreciate all the briefers providing their thoughtful insights. The United States has long believed that YPS and WPS agendas are mutually reinforcing, that when we lift up young people, we lift up women, and when we lift up women, we lift up young people, and when we lift up both, we empower entire communities, and that empowering these groups and their communities create a more secure and more peaceful world for us all. Unfortunately, we also know that right now young people, and especially young women, are disproportionately impacted by conflict. Violence disrupts their education and diminishes their job prospects, dashing their hopes for the future. It limits their access to civic spaces and squashes their economic potential. I've met with those young people, the girl from Sudan who said the horrors she experienced caused her to lose her ambition, the 10-year-old from Ukraine who amidst so much fighting, so much violence, just wanted to go back to school and see her friends. We know the children of Gaza are not able to pursue their education through no fault of their own in a conflict in which they have not been part of. And yet, we also see girls in Afghanistan denied access to education, restricted by the Taliban, and children and women are being held hostage in horrible conditions in Gaza. Against fierce headwinds, we have seen young people all over the world mobilize to respond to these challenges and become the architects of their futures, such as the young women Simone described from the DRC. Madam President and colleagues, we must do everything in our power to support and uplift these young women and other young people. And we acknowledge the recommendations that are in the YPS report for additional resources, and I note the recommendations made by our very able youth advisor sitting next to me this morning. That is the driving ethos behind the United States strategy to prevent conflict and promote stability, which affirms our support for inclusive political processes to resolve ongoing violent conflicts with an emphasis on the meaningful participation of women and youth. Incorporating diverse, intersectional, and critically intergenerational perspectives in peace and security processes isn't just the right thing to do. It is the only way to ensure that our solutions are inclusive, impactful, and lasting. And these are not recommendations that are being forced on countries by outsiders, as you may have heard. These are recommendations that are being requested and asked for